different formats. I make immersive events, theatre, VR experiences, and I was creative director of the Gunpowder Plot with Tim. And I also was recently working as creative director of the new Immersive Museum of Shakespeare that will come out 2025. And I also work in games quite a lot, particularly in performance directing. So I kind of have a multifaceted background, you could say, if not a bit odd.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we've joined forces as Buried Giants. We want to create amazing immersive experiences, and we're particularly inspired by the kind of possibilities of legend, folklore, myth, legends, and history, because we think they're really untapped possibilities within the immersive world. But as we said, we met in the Gunpowder Plot, so in case people haven't seen that, we'll just play a short trailer. I hope it's not going to be incredibly loud, but brace yourselves in case it is. The Gunpowder Plot immersive experience is, I think, a whole new way of experiencing history.
This experience tells the story behind this. You will be a spy infiltrating the Gunpowder Plot.
You get asked to be inside it, you get to feel everything, you get to meet the people, you get to smell it, touch it, hear it, and we do that through both the magic of theatre and through technology.
Virtual reality takes you back to being a kid again. It gives you that sense of magic, and to be able to take people literally into Jacobean London. You are going to go down the River Thames and see London as it was in 1605.
My role in it begins with drawing visuals of the sorts of things that the audience can expect to be surrounded by or to experience.
So when the audience are in the experience, they will be underground in the Tower vaults next to the Tower of London. It's a really great place to experience this story because it's so close to where many of the key events of the story happen.
We are separated here from the people that were part of this extraordinary plot only by time and not by location.
This is not like anything you've seen before. You will never have been immersed in this way. It's entertainment, you're with people, and you're on a mission.
A lot of people are going to have the kind of experience that they will remember for a very long time.
Where else can you step back to 1605 and infiltrate history's most famous plot?
The Gunpowder Plot, immersive, will take you back to 1605 and put you in the heart of history's most daring conspiracy.
It's worth saying on that, we had a really, really amazing team, and we actually have a couple of people here who've worked on it. So thanks to them, we had a really wonderful team on there.
Fab. So as Buried Giants, we do a number of different things. We've got a whole slate of ideas of immersive shows we're in various stages of production on. We work with other organisations to turn their ideas into immersive experiences. Also a lot of consulting about managing that organisational change into the kind of new immersive world. And finally, we've in fact just received Innovate UK funding to develop a mid-scale immersive platform, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but we can't say too much right now.
So yes, welcome. What are we talking about now? I'm confused. Great. Okay, so just to let you know what we are going to talk about now, we're going to talk about a little bit about the history of immersive, how looking back actually helps us in our estimation look forward. We're going to talk a little bit about what obviously is world building. It's a very used word. So what do we mean by that term? We're going to talk a bit about we call it thinking in immersive. So how you can kind of use immersive techniques to think about world building for your organization. We're going to look at a couple of the key formats and technologies that are at our disposal and how we might utilize them. And we're going to literally talk about how do you do it? Where do you start? What tools can you use? And what benefits are there of doing this in the first place?
Yeah. So we're hoping to answer for you the question, why do world building? We think that there's two broad categories here. It does something amazing for audiences and something for organizations. And we think it answers a lot of the questions and ambitions that organizations have at the moment. So for audiences, about personalization of experience, about kind of building longer term relationships with your audiences, and creating experiences that allow your audience to explore themselves and better understand themselves as well as the stories that you're telling them. And then for organizations, there are commercial opportunities from this, as I said, the relationship with audiences, and also a kind of shared language for internal working, so across departments and things like that, if you all believe in the world together. So I always like to kind of think a little bit longer term, take the long view on stuff. And I'd like to make the argument that actually things like museums and heritage sites used to be immersive. So if you look back at the kind of origin of museums, the cabinets of curiosities, the wonder cabinets, they were literally places where you were supposed to feel awe and wonder, and they were curated not with labels and things, taxonomies, things like that. It was about it was about kind of the incredible kind of objects and the way they'd been arranged. And that runs through loads of different things, like medieval pilgrimages. In Jerusalem, they had a big bowl full of holy water. You put your head in and could hear the screams of those in hell. So, we've always been doing this for a long time. And I would say it's maybe the 19th century where we started to turn these types of places into places for learning, maybe even propaganda for empire and Darwinism and things like that. So, yeah, immersive is a return to how things used to be. You can argue with this, by the way. It's just a theory.
So, yes, what is world building? It is a term that's used a lot. I first came across it in thinking about game design. Obviously, it's very used in sci-fi and fantasy fiction. And it can be a very elaborate process of creating the culture and rules of a world, from history, geography, people, ecology. In games, we call it game lore. We have a big book which has got everything from how a mega crystal might work to how long a dragon lives, whatever it is. And so there, I'm really talking about a maximalist version. We understand that most people are not starting from scratch. They're not starting from a blank canvas where they can just recreate a whole world and add some monsters into something that already exists. So the minimalist version of this, the minimum version, would be enough of a world for audiences to be immersed within it. So understanding their role, understanding their agency and their relationship, and applying that to your places and your spaces. And it's worth just adding, we talk a little bit about this further on, but the 3D digital core of the virtual production process really is like a world building exercise in itself. So if you're using that technology, you're probably fully across this idea, but we'll demonstrate why that's very useful.
Right. We put in the blurb for the talk that we'd teach you how to compete with Marvel. Slightly regret that in retrospect, but what we can do, we're not, it's not going to be like for like in direct competition, but we think that there is absolutely lessons to learn from why people find so much kind of pleasure and identity in these worlds. These, we all know these kind of big story worlds like Wizarding World, Lord of the Rings, Westeros, etc. They're an escape from reality. They give spaces where people can have kind of long-term relationships with characters. They kind of grow together. That's certainly something that happened with Harry Potter. It allows a kind of reflection with the real world, kind of help you understand your kind of role in the real world better. It enables creativity, fan fiction, all of this sort of stuff. But mostly we think that it's a world in which to kind of find yourself, or even kind of become yourself. So it's really tied into people's identity. So these are kind of those motivations for people engaging in story worlds we think are really applicable to your organizations.
And I don't know if you're like me, but anytime I start on any process, it feels like a lot of work. I want to ask myself, like, why bother? Like, what is this for? So for us, the idea of world building really is to make the core of whatever is being offered more immersive. And we'll talk about why we think immersive is a good vehicle for this. It allows an expansion of the offer across multiple platforms in a cohesive way. If you want, it can create standalone immersive experiences and generate new revenue streams, but it also can be applied to various different things that you're already working with. And it really is about making the audience part of that world, making them have a shared space and a shared time where they learn as much, if not more, about themselves as they do about the story world.
And just in terms of definitions, so that we kind of can understand exactly what we mean by each of these terms going forward. So immersion, we're saying, is where enough has been done that the audience believe they are in a different reality. And then world building is the kind of essential precursor to creating an experience that is truly immersive. It's creating a world that's much bigger than just the story that's being told. So thinking in immersive, we always think it's really useful to go right back to the idea of how our senses work and how we perceive the world. We receive all of this kind of data from the world and we model that in our brain, but the process of modeling it means that it's brings into play all of our memories and personality and all these things. So the world that's modeled inside our brains is completely unique to each of us. We don't have access to the world directly. We kind of infer it through our senses. And if we saw everything that was happening in the world all of the time, it would be sensory overload for us. And we've evolved just to notice change. And change is actually one of the fundamental elements of story. So, the classic story structure, the hero's journey, is about a human being facing adversity, seeking a kind of to restore power, dying. You don't have to die, but the hero dies, is reborn, and then comes back to change the world based on this new knowledge. And story isn't secondary to humans. It is fundamental to who we are. Our brains work as storytelling machines. They take all of the random events that happen to us and put them into a neat cause and effect order. And the great thing is that we're always the heroes of our own stories. So we tell ourselves anyway.
So this is where we start talking about why we believe in immersive so much. But essentially how we think about it is from moving something from storytelling into story doing. So from a passive kind of perspective, where somebody, you're watching someone else's reality, into story doing, when you're active, the audience is experiencing the story as their own reality. So they model the world in the same way in an immersive experience as they do model the world anywhere else. So it definitely becomes part of their perception of the world and part of their memory.
Yeah. And we thought it'd be useful just to share a kind of basic ingredients list of what kind of immersive means to us. So we believe it needs some kind of multi-sensory element. It's not just visual. It's not just delivered through a single sense. It involves some kind of performance. That might be live, that might be digital, or a mixture of the two. It's 360 sets. The audience must believe that they are in that world physically themselves. Audience must be active. They must believe they have some kind of ability to affect that world. And normally this is delivered through a combination of technologies of kind of varying sorts. And we'll talk about those a bit in a moment.
So yeah, immersive really is unique. It is storytelling through the body. So it's our bodies that are telling our brains this is real. So we're stimulating the senses. And I just said this a little bit, but that really makes people feel the story in a way as if it's real to them. There's a thing that Tim and I talk a lot about, which is telling two stories simultaneously. Quite often people come out of experiences that we've worked on and they say, oh, this is what we did. We did this, we did that. Not we saw this, we saw that. We did it. So they have a journey that they've created themselves and we have a story that we've created. And when those two things really intersect is where you get like really exciting kind of audience responses. And it's about making memories. Because immersive storytelling is body rooted, it is like any other type of memory making, but it's incredibly memorable because of all of those inputs happening at the same time.
And particularly relating to history stories, one of the real kind of benefits we think is the ability to kind of experience history real time. So you're with the characters, you're at that moment. Hilary Mantel she talked about it in this beautiful way where even if you're telling very well-known stories, her challenge was to make you believe that the characters don't know what's going to happen next. So immersive offers you to be with those characters in the moment. And if you've created the experience well and it truly is immersive, then the audience also won't know what's going to happen next. And they'll feel kind of very excited by that. Generative or emergent narratives. So rather than just telling a story that kind of pans out in a linear way, regardless of the audience actions, generative narratives are based on the choices that the audience make. So depending on how they interact or move through the space, the story, as Hannah was just saying, the second story of the audience member, everyone's will be different. So kind of it depends on them being active in the space. And depending on the choices you do make, it reveals as much about yourself as the story world. So you're learning about yourself as much as the story world if you truly have a kind of generated narrative.
And just a little fun thing about immersive is we really do believe it does give you superpowers. You can time travel, you can teleport, you can be transformed in scale, you can be invisible.
We should have dance moves for these, shouldn't we?
Yeah, you can be in somebody else's point of view. So yeah, it really is a superpower as far as storytelling is concerned.
And as if that wasn't enough, according to a 2023 story, immersive learning experiences have deeper emotional impact and stronger internalization of information. So people being immersed in things makes them remember things better, basically. So key formats.
So really what we wanted to do here was just kind of burst any worries or bubbles about like how you make this stuff. Every time I've made anything, and again, I know Lewis here on the front row, remember this, it's a very iterative process. You're kind of like making it up as you go because everything is so different in every time you make an experience. And that means you can also discover formats. You don't need to be thinking, oh, I have to do this format, we have to do it in this way. Like you can discover different formats as you go and like take bits of different ones, as long as you're being kind of cohesive over the whole thing. So some of the ones that you'll be aware of, but it's useful to explore, is free roam, where you kind of go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Guided, which is usually also pulsed, where you're got particular type of guide that sends you particular points. Carousel, which is like gunpowder, which is where we have people in different rooms at the same time and they move through the spaces as a group. Where you have just interactive elements. We were using this quite a lot looking at the Museum of Shakespeare, like how we can have interactive elements that are immersive in different areas of the museum. Spatialized, so even just thinking about the 3D environment of stuff that's already there, like adding ambisonic or even airflow or whatever it is. And then hub and spoke, which is one just getting quite a lot of traction at the minute in new things that are being built around the world, where you have a centralized hub, which is more free roam, and then elements off it that are more guided or specific. So as you can see, it basically means just mix it up. Find out what fits is and make up the process as you're making up the format is kind of how we've always had to do it. Yep.
Or you employ us. It's the other option.
Yeah, that's true. We know all this. We can do it.
So just to focus on technology, which is, as we said, is a kind of key delivery method for this. So, and the kind of immersive technologies that you hear so much about, we think are kind of particularly powerful in creating this, in moving from world building to immersive experiences. So spatial computing or the embodied internet means that rather than a flat screen or touch buttons, it's actually people's bodies, movements, their choices about movements, and content is kind of knowledgeable about the 360 3D space that it's in. So there's a real interplay between digital worlds and physical worlds, and a real blurring of the boundaries between those, which are really, really powerful tools for delivering immersive experiences from world building. The digital catapult definition, which is, I think, really good, is that immersive technologies are those that extend or replace reality for the user. We always think there should be a narrative imperative to a technology choice. Don't just do it as a gimmick. Don't do it for its own sake. Another way of thinking about it is that immersive tech is basically augmented reality for history. It's layering the past onto the present to allow audiences to interact with it. And we're real advocates for not just focusing on the visual. There's real power to using technologies that focus on other senses like sound and smell and touch. So we'll just whiz through a couple of these that we think are particularly relevant. You know, there won't be a surprise to you probably, but you know, virtual reality is when you put a headset on, you're shut off from the world, you're experiencing a completely virtual world. The possibilities of that are that it could be incredibly rich and interactive. The downsides are that it tends to be a solitary experience rather than the social one.
That's usually made in a game engine. AR, which does what it says on the tin, augmented reality. You're usually using your device to look at something in the outside world. There's an overlay on top of it. It's augmenting the reality that you're already in.
As we said, really, really, sound is such a powerful way to tell stories and make people feel in another place. You're probably all familiar with surround sound, which is kind of a horizontal positioning of sound, but the kind of latest developments are something called ambisonics. You may all know this, but ambisonics, which is essentially allowing sound not only to come from every direction, but also above and below. So it's a kind of genuinely 360 sound world.
So slightly arbitrarily lumped light and projection in together just for speed, but we use a lot light all the time in immersive experiences. You'll use it all the time, but we're using it hopefully in quite innovative ways to suggest, I know, windows, and then somebody moves past the windows so that you get the sense of a shadow moving, or whatever it is that just adds a little bit of storytelling. And projection really is mainly used to create larger 3D spaces within smaller ones to give depth. I mean, we've all have seen it, but some of the effects of projection are just extraordinary.
And again, another kind of non-visual sensory one is haptics. So that's kind of digital delivery of touch. That can be from simple vibrations to kind of whole body suits, or kind of, car racing, cars, or what have you. And also motion simulators, which kind of move your body in time with the virtual world that you're experiencing. So again, these are just ways of using other senses to really, really deepen immersion for the audience.
And here we have ABBA Voyage, obviously one of the best examples of a hologram, but actually holograms can be much smaller, made on much smaller scale, kind of using most like old-fashioned Pebbles Goes, but in a digital way, just to make an object appear 3D in space.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and virtual production is a phrase that's being talked about a huge amount in the industry now. The kind of core element of this is the LED volume, this kind of space with LED panels all around, onto which are projected or played 3D worlds. You can put performers in front of that or sets in front of that, and the video camera and the human eye is completely fooled into believing that they're in a real location.
Face and body capture, we'll probably put in one of the oldest examples of this ever. It's essentially creating digital avatars. It's interesting at the minute, actually, is a lot of this has been changed by AI. The way that we're working in it is really changing. But I do a lot of this in video games.
Right. And finally, just some more other senses, maybe even not technology, maybe this is old-fashioned effects or theatre, but, adding in smell, adding in wind and temperature and moisture, all of these things, again, really deepen immersion. And one of the points we really want to make talking about all of these technologies is that in the creative industries, there's this the ecosystem developing based around virtual production, but at the core of it is the game engine. And we'd like to argue that the game engine is essentially a world building platform. So you create a world in 3D in the game engine. You do that by scanning the world in a variety of different ways: photos, videos, or motion capture, volumetric video capture, photogrammetry, face cap, all these different ways, or LiDAR scanning for buildings. That gets put into a game engine, which is essentially the 3D version of the world. You can put that as a digital twin to test it with audiences, or even run the show live. But once you've built it in the game engine, you can then export it or push it out through loads of different channels. So you make it once and it can go to a virtual production studio where it can become a game, it can go online, a film, a game, all sorts of different things. So our argument is that if this becomes the dominant kind of production system for the creative industries, then world building is essentially the core of it, because that's the function of a game engine.
Yes, so we actually have a platform we mentioned earlier called the Everything Chamber, and our lovely tagline there: imagine a room that can take you anywhere. So if anybody wants to speak to us about this afterwards, it is essentially a mid-scale touring solution, we think, which uses a lot of these different technologies in one space.
Sales pitch over. So world building how-to, this is the last section. So we're going to basically share what we think are some of the kind of key tips and techniques that you could apply to your own work. So firstly, historical research. I can hear you thinking, maybe, surely historical work research is just world building. What's the difference between them? So, and I'd say yes, in many ways, but I think there's a final step missing, which is historical research is world building extends that historical research, extends that world in order to encompass the audience. So the audience is within that world, they're present with the characters, they're sharing space and time, and they have motivations, options, and limitations within that world. So they are within it. So it's a kind of speculative finish to a factual process, or basically turning historical facts into a little bit of historical fiction with the audience member as the protagonist. I don't think there's one single way to talk about like how to do immersive or how to describe it. But there's a kind of set of, we call it immersive ingredients, a set of kind of connected ways to understand that audience role. So really important, I think, is the type of immersion, because that really dictates what the audience can do and what they understand their role to be. So it can be just spatial immersion, where it's a wonderful space that they want to explore, or it can be mental immersion, where they feel they have a task to do within that space, and those tasks can be kind of tactical or strategic or narrative. It could be just sensory immersion, where you think things like kind of Team Lab, or lots of those experiences where they're just kind of beautiful, sensory, overwhelming experiences. But these types of immersion can be combined, and actually lots of the best experiences do combine spatial and mental elements of immersion. The aesthetics of the world are really important as well, particularly if you have a historic space that you then want to kind of continue across virtual platforms and things like that. You obviously can't have the aesthetics of the virtual world really different from the aesthetics of the real world. And it's worth thinking about whether the transition from the real world to a digital world works for the audience, if it feels too cartoony or CGI or what have you. But there are other ways to do it. So you could do it with sound or what have you. If we are putting audiences into worlds, if they're immersed, then they feel embodied, they feel presence in that world. And that raises a lot of questions. So who am I? Am I myself in that world? Am I a character? Am I visible to the other characters in the world? Am I visible to the other people experiencing this with me? So you have to really make sure that they know who they are in that world, because otherwise it can be a very disorientating experience. And yeah, key to that is kind of specifying the degree of agency. Just how much can you do? Because if you think you can do more than you can, it's a very disappointing experience quite often. And then again, specifically, oh, pardon me.
Yeah, so we have a slide here just about selective authenticity, which was quite a massive preoccupation when we were making the command.
Yeah. So if we are putting people as contemporaries to historical characters, or we're asking the audience to model the world in the same way that historical characters did, we have to be kind of honest about the fact that we're dealing with different minds. The kind of beliefs and superstitions and identities of the people of the past are different. So how can we put contemporary audiences into that mindset? We'd argue that sometimes it requires you to reframe history for modern minds, because otherwise the kind of immersion is broken. So this picture here is, I mean, it's quite an old one now, but a show we did at Banqueting House many years ago called Long Live Queen James. It told the story of James I and his male favourites, but it was done as a Jacobean drag show in Polari. I mean, you can see what they're wearing, all the rest of it. But the audience feedback we had was that people said, I understand now what it would have been like to be in James's court. Now, of course, you know, fact for fact, that's not what it was like, but the experience was the same. So we'd argue for a kind of authenticity of experience over a kind of like, you know, actually dogged historical authenticity in every way, if you don't want to break immersion for audiences.
So this is just a little look into my process. So it's worth saying that this is not in any way exhaustive. And it's based on the gunpowder plot, because that's probably the one that me and Tim worked on. So when I was working in theatre, I worked at the Donmar Warehouse, and I worked with a lovely director called Josie Rourke. One of the things she said to me is like, you need everyone to know what you're in. And what she meant by that was, we're doing a restoration comedy. What are the rules of that world? How does that function? And once everybody knew that, what that was, like how it affected the acting, it affected the set design, it affected everything. So as soon as we knew what we were in, it meant it gave a particular perspective to everything we were building. So how I've kind of extrapolated that into my work is a kind of top-down approach. So you get consistency both story-wide and then hopefully institutionally. You know, not saying it's easy. So I always look for, from a sort of dramaturgical perspective, what is the central preoccupation? And then for Gunpowder, this is just a few of the things we looked at. Obviously, you would structure in a different way. We looked at what type of experience was it? What's the tonality of that experience? What's the kind of dynamism? And we always put this through the filters of what was the audience segmentation work we did before we came into this. So what do they want? So you can see if I go on to the next slide, our central preoccupation that we created for ourselves was, is violence for a cause ever justified? And we had this on the wall when we were doing our layouts of the scenes. We spoke about it with the actors. It was a central preoccupation to us the whole time. we looked at what type of experience it was. And we were like, it's an attraction, it's immersive theatre, it's educational. Great. So we understand the typologies of behaviour and interact what that is because of those words. So then we went and had a look at the tonality. What tonality were we looking for? We wanted it to be surprising. We wanted it to be dangerous. We wanted it to be family orientated and emotionally driven. And obviously we got to those through a lot of talks with the various organizations involved to come up with those kind of ideas. And then what was the dynamism we wanted? We came very quickly to, we wanted to be exhilarating. It was never going to feel super like, chilled out because of the story. It was never going to feel like totally like all fun again because of the story. So we settled on exhilaration. So just to show how that became applied, and this again isn't exhausted, this is a snapshot of some of the things that it got applied to. From that top line preoccupation itself, we were able to start thinking about the structure and the storytelling. So is violence for a cause ever justified? Means we needed to set out both arguments. So in the first half of the experience, we have 2 scenes that are pro the crown and 2 scenes that are pro the plot. And in the middle of the experience, you get asked which way you want to vote. And then that affects the second half. So that was how we kind of got to that kind of structure. It's a sort of basic dramaturgical idea that we were pulling apart. When we're looking at the types of experience, so we said attraction, educational, immersive theatre, that led us to a few decisions here, like the inclusion of a final coda scene that kind of, we call it the corridor of truth, which kind of sets right a few of the things because we needed to be educational. We needed there to be a real clarity of storytelling. So that led to things as simple as we tell you you're a Catholic 12 times in the first 10 minutes. So it led to things like that. And then it's attraction. So what do people expect from that? They expect merchandise, they expect photo opportunities, they expect a big star in the form of Tom Felton, they expect F&B. So that's where that came from. When you're looking at tonality, surprising, dangerous, family oriented, emotionally driven, we started thinking about how does that apply to lighting? So it's quite dark in there. We'll also talk about why that was led by some of the physical stuff. The sound design, we created a full score because we wanted it to have that dangerous, kind of emotionally driven feeling. There's a full score all the way through. It affected the set design, everything from we need this wall to feel wet. Why is it wet? Because we're in a dangerous, dark, disturbing place. It affected script decisions. It very, very much affected the performance style that we were asking our actors to do, which we called naturalistic but heightened. And it very much affected a huge decision that affected everything operationally, which is what we wanted: repeat characters. We wanted you to be able, as an audience, to meet a particular character again and again so that you had an emotional connection to them. And lastly, you can see from the exhilarating there, we've got full score. We've got things like the inclusion of a zip wire thing, which is actually based on a true story. It's not too random, going out over the Thames. We've got the audience very active in the plot. We lose a lot of scenes of physical danger, and we add even physical effects came off all of that feeling of exhilaration. Like we use wind a lot because it gives people that sense of exhilaration. And this plays out across everything if you can get it right, across marketing, post-experience and audience interaction. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but this is kind of the way that we were trying to approach this kind of world building as a whole.
Great. And also just to have a kind of honesty reality check for a moment. So, you don't start with a blank canvas, especially in heritage organizations. So everything Hannah just described sits within the kind of practical parameters of the budget of the show, the reality of the space. It was lots of small chambers within a listed building. The business model, how long the scenes could be and how big the groups needed to be to break even, and all the ambitions of all the organizations involved. So but the advice we'd give is don't try and change those parameters. You have to kind of face into them and lean into them right at the start, because actually they become your creative opportunity to build from those.
A good example was just that we had very low ceilings, so trying to make everything feel outside was a nightmare. So we put all of the vistas in VR, but that gave us a structure to start making the show.
So very, very 2 more slides. The peak end rule is a really good rule of thumb. So regardless of how brilliant everything you make is, the truth is that audiences generally remember the peak bit and the end bit. So when you're making decisions about where to focus budget and all of the rest of it, it's a really good heuristic just to remember. Focus on the peak and the end, because that's what people will be talking about when they leave the show. And make sure the end's good, because even if the peak's good and the end's bad, they're talking about the bad ends when they leave. So finally then, you've built a world. What else are you going to do with it? So transmedia storytelling is a kind of established concept, but we think that once you build a world, it's kind of the obvious way to increase the impact of it and kind of increase the reach of it. So, transmedia storytelling can be a single story told over multiple platforms. I've put the example there of Why So Serious, the launch of the Batman film years ago, which was an online quiz turned into a real life scavenger hunt, had people going to bakeries in America, having cakes with ringing mobile phones in them that invited them to the premiere of the show. So, you can't, it'd be nice to be able to work at that level, but not always. But it can be multiple stories told over different platforms. So, from this world that you've built, work out where audiences are and what they want, what the ways in which they want the story to tell, and you can reach kind of lots of people through that way. Extends it pre-post journey, pre-post visits, and aligns with the communications. So, and if you've got people making a buzz online, that's doing your marketing for you already.
So conclusions, just to summarize, immersion is a return to museums as a place of wonder. Immersion has been proven to improve learning experiences, and we think world building deepens immersion.
Yeah, it creates opportunities across institutions, both creative and commercial. And it kind of really is an opportunity to link up all of your platforms together in one kind of coherent story world.
It extends historical research into historical fiction with the audience as the protagonist, with them at the very heart of that story. What does that mean? World building models. The new virtual production line ecosystem that Tim spoke about is a kind of very easy way, not easy. It's a very good opportunity for extending that world building.
Yeah. And then finally, as we've said so many times, we think the real power is that it allows audiences to reveal themselves, truths about themselves, things that they maybe didn't know, whilst they're going through the experience of revealing the story world that you've created.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Tim. Excellent presentation. I've done the gunpowder plot and it's amazing. For those that haven't been, go and try it. Are there any questions while we've got Hannah and Tim here? If you just want to raise your hands, pass that back.
This is weird.
Thanks, Hannah and Tim. That was really useful. I'm interested, given how much world building and immersion has exploded in the past few years and the proliferation of sites delivering it, where do you see its future? Because as more and more experiences come online, how will people begin to deliver something new, something changed, and stay ahead of this kind of very fast curve of development?
I lost that a little bit, so you may have to answer.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question, because at the moment it means nothing as a term, really, immersive, and it's used to describe the good, the bad, and the ugly. So hopefully people won't be too put off by bad immersive experiences, and actually, so there's something called the Immersive Experience Network, the Immersive Creators Network that we're part of, and lots of the talk is about developing kind of genres within immersion. So in the same way that audiences for more traditional formats, there's a maturity and people have particular interests and things they know they like, then that will develop in immersive, so that it will kind of, people won't be kind of, it won't be such an unknown risk going to something that's immersive, and also people won't be able to describe everything. Like walked past an immersive gym the other day, etc., etc. So it will actually mean something, hopefully.
Hi there.
Hello.
Can immersion ever be a mass experience? Can you give people true agency if they're surrounded by loads of people, or does it have to be something more bespoke?
I'm just listening. What was the question about?
Can you create true immersion when people are kind of aware of that they're with fellow visitors, etc.?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. What do you think about that? I'm passing it.
Yeah, thrown over under the bus. You can't ignore it, basically. So it's not something that's going to go away. So you have to be able to build. If people are aware of their fellow travelers, then they have to understand the role. That they all have a shared purpose or different purposes, or how to interact with each other. So I'd say in truth, it does diminish immersion at the moment, but there are things you can do to reduce that by making people kind of understand. In some ways, like some of the nicest bits of the Gunpowder plot are where groups of strangers sit around talking to each other in the interval, because we ask them to make the decision about whether they become pro-crown, pro-plot. So yes, they're aware that they are contemporary audiences, etc. But they play the game together because we've set the rules really tightly.
I think as well, we're about to see a massive cultural shift happening with AI. I'm actually doing a talk next week about AI, and having looked at how it enables personalization on a grand scale with multiple people in the same space, I think that's really going to change how we're looking at what is possible. Particularly, I think museums are going to be able to have self-curation on a level that currently is completely unattainable. And as we're seeing these tools get more and more powerful, I think it's going to become more and more accessible. So obviously there's a lot of ethical questions in and around that, but I think that wave is coming.
Very last question, just there in the front.
Just on that point of AI, are you seeing any use of generative AI in the actual world building process?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, like heaps and heaps and heaps. So it's been happening in games for quite a long time. So there are open world games that have kind of infinite created worlds that go on forever and ever. We're starting to see that move over into this virtual production technique in live format. Some of the downsides of it are that infinite 3D worlds created in real time cost a lot of money, and also are pretty problematic when it comes to energy usage. So I think it's again coming as these things move, but at the moment they're slightly problematic unless those two things can be sort of addressed. But yeah, there's experiences that are starting to use it. It's at WKDN Museum in Chicago has one. There's quite a few things I think that are moving forward on that.
And a couple of specific examples, like non-player characters are being kind of brought to life using AI, so that they are given a character and kind of autonomy to act, but they are fed the data of everything you've done up to the moment you reach them, so that they can comment on what's happened. So it feels like a interaction rather than a hi there.
There's a really cool, just on a NPC, but not an NPC. There's a thing called Meet Dali. Have you seen that? It's just an oral owl experience where you pick up his lobster phone and you speak, but it's Dali's voice and it talks to you and it can ask it questions. And I think that's in San Francisco at the moment. But there's that kind of like live character generation is really starting to And even Layered, who we made Gunpowder for, are using AI kind of data farming of Elvis, for example, to bring him to life in their new thing. So yeah, it's definitely starting to like proliferate as a tool.
Fantastic. So that brings our session to an end. If you can show your appreciation to Hannah and to Tim, thank you.